So, the following presentation will discuss all factors that should influence the decision whether Iran possesses the ability to acquire nuclear weapons and their ability to successfully launch and detonate it against the United States or one of our allies. I believe that there are several factors that play into whether we should see Iran as a threat or not, and the intelligence community needs to understand first the Iranian-United States relations, the risk associated with these weapons of mass destruction, their statewide violence, and some of the public opinion on Iran. These values are not the only ones that are important, but there are a few that I focused on. First things first is the relationship between us and Iran have been rocky for over 65 years. This, dates back to the overthrow of Mohammad Mossadegh and the coup that we used to depose him from power, to the current situation with their top military member being killed via airstrike. They stated that they wanted severe revenge. There's a definite need on how to de-escalate all tensions between us and Iran, and with that in mind, in the short term, both sides have to find a way to walk away from the rhetoric that we've used to bind us to escalatory action. In the long run, we need a more democratic government in Iran that recognizes us as as an ally and not a great Satan, more or less. It'd be unlikely to decrease any escalatory action in the near future due to the high levels of hostility that run between both our nations. The most recent interactions between us display a high level of hatred towards the countries, and the animosity most definitely is fueling their proliferation efforts. It should also be noted that this feud can lead to problems between other countries in the region. Increasing tensions between the U.S. and Iran has important implications for both Iraq as well as other Arab Gulf states. Their military posture has led to an increase in arms purchase by their neighbors, and a nuclear-armed Iran would likely spark a nuclear arms race in the Middle East that would further destabilize the volatile and vital regions over there. There's also an international community that has a vested interest in maintaining the calm in the Middle East. A nuclear-armed Iran poses a direct threat to our closest allies in the Middle East. Israel is most at risk because their leaders have repeatedly declared that Israel should be wiped from the map. And Iran is generally considered one of the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism through its financial and operational supports for groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, and others. So they could potentially even share this nuclear technology and know-how with extreme terrorist groups that are hostile to the United States or Israel in the West. Another important factor to consider is their current economy and whether or not they have the funding to finance weapons of mass destruction. So their economy was badly affected for several years from the sanctions that were imposed by the international community over their nuclear program. But then in the reinstatement of the sanctions in 2018, particularly those on the energy, shipping, and financial sectors, caused foreign investment to dry up and hit oil exports. So their GDP contracted 4.8%, and their unemployment spiked from about 14 to 16%. So it's unknown whether or not they have the financial means to acquire and use weapons of mass destruction, but it's not unlikely either. Lately, there's been a use of lethal force against their people throughout the country, and it's unprecedented, even for the Islamic Republic and its record of violence. Between 180 to 400 people and possibly more were killed in 4 days from intense violence that came from the gasoline increase in November, and there were 2,000 wounded and 7,000 detained, and that's just what's recorded. So there's just so much happening that needs to be taken into consideration with Iran before we can determine whether or not they are likely. And after all this intelligence has been collected and processed, it's been determined that there is a high likelihood that they have the capabilities to access and detonate weapons of mass destruction. The current relations between us provide more than enough reason for them to retaliate in any way that they see fit, and there's a high level of animosity that is fueling their fire. They also have always been interested in proliferation. This is not a new effort. So, with them being one of the largest areas of state-sponsored terrorism, there's really nothing stopping them. It's incredibly detrimental because they have access to networks all over the world who can further help their interests. And it's in our best interest to attempt to thwart any plans that they may have to use weapons of mass destruction. This doesn't just pertain to us, but also to our allies. There's no knowing when or where or how they could strike, so it's best to be prepared and understand their capabilities. It's best to consider them as a threat and employ all necessary tactics to limit their capabilities. I would say, in my opinion, that the JCPOA has a strong footing and we need to follow it more closely. It contains a lot of strong provisions that can help dramatically reduce the threat of a nuclear Iran. To begin, it places inspectors on the ground and constantly monitors Iran's nuclear supply chain. It imposes really tough physical prohibitions on their current supply of potential nuclear ingredients. So, we're shutting off the pathways to uranium and plutonium that help build this bomb. So the agreement requires them to relinquish the vast majority of their centrifuges, which, help create the bomb. They also have to surrender 97% of their enriched uranium. So they're going to be barred from enriching uranium beyond what is, energy grade fuel, which is, I think, 3%, and weapons grade is 90%. So there's a very clear line between what they can be doing and what they can't. Also, the restrictions would demolish Iran's current nuclear program. If, they chose to risk a military intervention by them violating this agreement and preparing the nuclear weapon, it would take, their engineers a lot longer to achieve the bomb than it would to, just not. Obviously these limitations and stipulations are meaningless unless we don't back them and hold them to their end of the bargain.